morning, everyone, or good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to GW Institute for Korean Studies, or GWIKS. I'm Joon Hyung Kim, Associate Director of GWIKS. And thank you for joining our Korea Policy Forum. This forum is co-sponsored by the East Asia National Resource Center at GW. As you know, South Koreans will soon go to the polls to elect their next president on March the 9th next year. The two leading candidates are former Gyeonggi Province Governor Lee Jae-myung from the ruling Democratic Party and former Prosecutor General Yoon Seok-youl from the opposition People Power Party. The GW Institute for Korean Studies has invited a prominent supporter of each major candidate to share their views on the race and their preferred candidates' foreign policy goals. We had a scheduling change to accommodate the speakers' very tight schedule, and the event has been split into two sessions over 2 days. And today's session will focus on the foreign policy of Yoon Seok-youl. The second session will be on December the 14th, a week away from now, focusing on the foreign policy of Lee Jae-myung. Today, we are privileged to host a distinguished speaker, Dr. Beomchul Shin. He worked at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies and served at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy as a tenured professor. Dr. Shin also served for the ROK Ministry of Foreign Affairs as the Director General for Policy Planning and for the ROK Minister of National Defense as the Senior Policy Advisor. And also joining us today as discussants are two distinguished Korea experts, Celeste Arrington, Korea Foundation Associate Professor of Political Science and International Affairs at GW, and Mark Tokola, Vice President of the Korea Economic Institute of America. With that, let me turn it over to Beomchul.
Let me first thank you, George Washington University and Professor Kim for having me this interesting event. I will explain the president candidate Yoon Seok-youl's foreign and security policy. However, let me first clarify that this presentation is based upon my personal view and does not represent any official view of the president candidate Yoon Seok-youl, because yet no official election promises are published. This is very hard to say that what is exact position, official position of President Yoon Seok-youl until the final president election promise will publish it probably at the end of this month. So I will say the candidate Yoon's foreign and security policy during the primary competition among People's Power Party member. Candidate Yoon at the time announced 11 points of election promises with regard to foreign and security policy. One is nuclear issue and inter-Korean issues. 3 are foreign policy toward the neighboring countries such as United States, China, and Japan. And 1 emerging security challenge issues such as climate change, and 1 cyber security system issues, and 5 military issues. Let me focus on the foreign policy and emerging security issues, because the military issue, with regard to military issues, if I try to explain this, maybe 15 minutes is too short to say even its name. So I'll focus on the foreign policy. These promises will be renewed by the end of this month, and official election promises will publish it maybe before the end of this year. So I will say one more time that today's presentation is the final one, and you have to watch closely on upcoming official one. Under this context, let me explain President candidate Yoon's election promises during the primary competition last September. So one is the denuclearization of North Korea and inter-Korean relations. As a direct stakeholder in the fate of Korean Peninsula, the Republic of Korea must play central role in international cooperation, as well as bilateral and multilateral negotiations for denuclearization of North Korea. However, Moon Jae-in administration tried as an arbitrator, not a major party of nuclear issue. We are party of a North Korean nuclear threat, but Moon administration played as a third party, such as arbitrators. So the Moon administration did not emphasize the denuclearization of North Korea itself. Instead, it even said that the necessity of a lift of sanction without any concrete behavior, concrete denuclearization behavior of North Korea. I think that the sanction plays most important role to levy international pressure to the North, but Moon administration thought that if international community lift the sanction, then North Korea shows or takes denuclearization steps. But I think that's groundless. In this context, I think candidate Yoon, on the one hand, tried to open the dialogue with the North, but also, on the other hand, tries to maintain principle that there is no lift of sanction before North Korea takes the denuclearization steps. This is the backbone, major principle of candidate Yoon's North Korea policy. Second is with regard to ROK-US alliance. Candidate Yoon tried to build on ROK-US comprehensive strategic alliance and strengthening its extended deterrence in response to the North Korean nuclear threat. As we know, the ROK-US alliance is the central axis of the ROK's foreign affairs and national security. Yoon Seok-youl said he would try to build the ROK-US alliance by sharing its vision and interest with the United States on the foundation of a liberal democracy and actually building on action, not words. There are many words from the Moon administration, so we need the action. As we know, that last May, there were fantastic summit joint statement between President Moon and President Biden. However, action would not follow after that. So I think that it is the right time to we should focus on action. To realize the comprehensive strategic alliance, we need concrete action, which we signed in last May. There are many issues with regard to ROK-US alliance, so it's difficult to explain all details at this moment. But I personally think candidate Yoon would put great importance on the alliance issues and will try to strengthen the alliance as strong as possible. On the other hand, with regard to the extended deterrence, during the debate at the primary competition among the People's Power Party, some candidate argued that South Korea tried to persuade the United States to reintroduce a tactical nuclear weapon to Korean Peninsula. However, this is too early to redeploy tactical nuclear weapon because we have to maintain denuclearization negotiation with the North. North Korea would argue nuclear disarmament on the negotiation if South Korea redeploy tactical nuclear weapon. So candidate Yoon said that he would strengthen extended deterrence instead of requesting redeploy of a tactical nuclear weapon. It is not that popular during the campaign because some conservative wanted to have a strong measure to redeploy tactical nuclear weapon. However, it is not the time to redeploy tactical nuclear weapon. So candidate Yoon maintains such a kind of a reasonable position, I think. So this is policy toward China. Candidate Yoon said that he will usher the new era of ROK-China cooperation based upon, this is a very important term, mutual respect. Since the THAAD deployment in 2016, South Korea suffered the Chinese economic sanction. However, these experiences played very important role for South Korean people to realize, to understand the Chinese intention on its policy toward the Korean Peninsula. So these days, many Koreans wanted to strengthen the ROK-US alliance, while those who prepare the cooperation with China are getting smaller and smaller. President candidate Yoon understands this kind of a sentiment. However, with regard to election promise, Yoon suggests a very moderate policy to China. The ROK should endeavor to generate motivation for ROK and China to continue with the dialogue and broaden cooperation based on the principle of mutual respect. You know that the peace and prosperity, common interest, and the separation of politics and economy, all these principles are important with regard to ROK-China relations. However, this time we emphasize the mutual respect because we know that mutual respect was broken during the THAAD deployment in 2016. So I think we have to restore the mutual respect. So China must respect South Korea's security concern and should cooperate with the denuclearization of North Korea and should understand the South Korea's deterrence measure. First is the most distinguished one, I believe, that the ROK-Japan relation. Candidate Yoon tried to build the ROK-Japan era of Kim Dae-jung-Obuchi joint declaration. It is very imperative, and we should make an effort to improve ROK-Japan relations, which are at their worst during the Moon administration. So we have to improve the relation for the future of both countries. To that end, we need to constructively re-engineer the innate spirit and objectives of the ROK-Japan joint declaration. A new ROK-Japan partnership toward the 21st century during the Kim Dae-jung and Obuchi administration. In 1998, the two leaders agreed comprehensive blueprints for the future of ROK-Japan relations. However, the next leaders of Korea and Japan couldn't follow this ideal position. So at this day, as we know that, we notice many trouble between ROK and Japan based upon the historic issues. So we understand that the history issue must solve based upon the justice and the sentiment of Korean people. However, we have to understand the necessity of security and economic cooperation with Japan. So we need a kind of approach of era of Kim Dae-jung-Obuchi joint declaration. So we named that era of Kim Dae-jung-Obuchi joint declaration version 2.0. Next two is respond to the emerging security challenges. As we know that we have to cope with the climate changes, environmental degradations, infectious disease, drug trafficking, and the emerging technologies. No, these are some of the emerging security challenges and threats which are tricky to cope with due to their complexities. So we have to coordinate each ministries who deal with this kind of problem, and then we have to organize such kind of system and maintain to establish the control tower with regard to that. It's almost the same that establish cybersecurity system. Inter-ministerial collaboration on cybersecurity maintained tenuous. We must build a systematic national response capabilities by fine-tuning of position and responses of Ministry of Science, National Intelligence Service, and Ministry of National Defense. We need coordination. However, at this moment, the leadership of the National Intelligence Service plays as a role of control tower, but we noticed many problems, so we have to renew these kind of systems. These are the foreign policy and the new kind of security challenge issues. And the president candidate Yoon Seok-youl are focused on these issues to improve the situation. The other issue, 5 are military issues, which is build a powerful military armed with cutting-edge science and technologies, build a Korean-style Iron Dome, and the new rifle style of barracks for the young generation, and make a country where soldiers who sacrifice for the nation are respected, and build a military town. These are the election promises with regard to defense issues, but it's too complicated to explain the short time. So I will stop here and I will respond to the question. Thank you for your listening.
We have 2 distinguished Korea experts. Let me ask Celeste for her comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Shin, it was great to hear from your perspective on the candidate Yoon's foreign policy. I'd like to direct my comments and questions towards 3 issues, 2 of which you really highlighted as core parts of your presentation. The first is missile defense, and the second is Korea-Japan relations. And with both of those, I'm interested also in how a Yoon presidency might manage public opinion inside South Korea. And then the third issue I'd like to raise are North Korea human rights. So let me start with the missile defense. As you mentioned, during the previous conservative administration of President Park Geun-hye, the Terminal High Altitude Aerial Defense, or THAAD, deployment in South Korea was one of arguably the 2 biggest challenges in foreign policy that her administration faced. And as you said, the THAAD deployment was intended to bolster US-Korea relations. And I think it did that, and it was important for that. As you mentioned, also the deployment of something like a Korean Iron Dome would presumably further that initiative, and you emphasized the Yoon camp's prioritization of bolstering or strengthening the US-ROK alliance. How would a Yoon presidency manage, say, domestic protests with regard to missile defense related deployments inside Korea? We saw in the news just yesterday, there are more protests about the installation of radar equipment related to missile defense outside Busan. And the protests around THAAD continue to roil. So what are some of the strategies that the Yoon administration would pursue in order to convince the public in Korea, and especially the vocal minority that are protesting missile defense related installations, that these are necessary and that this is an important part of the defense of South Korea? And then related to that, the other reason why THAAD deployment, as you mentioned, was a big challenge was Chinese economic retaliation. And so I'm wondering, you mentioned this idea of China-ROK mutual respect being an important principle on which China and South Korea could cooperate. How exactly would a Yoon administration separate out the strengthening of US-ROK missile defenses and continue to deepen cooperation or improve cooperation with China? What are some of the channels that you think are most promising for maintaining both the Korea-China relationship and the Korea-US relationship in this era of strategic tensions, I guess, between US and China? The second issue on which I'd like to ask you is Korea-Japan relations, which, as you mentioned, are at their worst in years under the Moon Jae-in administration. This foreign policy challenge became a serious one in the previous conservative administration of President Park Geun-hye when she helped broker the Comfort Women Agreement in 2015, which elicited huge backlash publicly in South Korea. And arguably was one of the reasons she ended up being impeached in 2017. So the deal on the Comfort Women issue, which is one of the core concerns about the historical issues that you mentioned, was intended to improve Korea-Japan relations. It backfired. The progressive Moon Jae-in administration, as well as civil society groups, accused the Park Geun-hye administration of sort of pursuing that deal in a non-democratic way. And so I would like to ask how you think a Yoon administration would prevent the type of public backlash that happened in 2015 with the Comfort Women deal. I understand your vision, or the vision of the Yoon camp as you understand it, is to have a Kim Obuchi 2.0. But we have a very different situation today than we did in 1998 in the Kim Obuchi era. So just to mention a few things, the might of China is very different than in 1998. The South Korean public has much less patience on the historical issues and is much more aware of historical issues. And there have been court cases, including the 2018 Supreme Court rulings on the issue of forced labor, or what Japan calls wartime labor. So what's different if you were to pursue a Kim Obuchi 2.0 in this totally different climate? What are the biggest challenges, do you think, in terms of managing both the relationship with Japan and also the relationship between the administration and the public in South Korea on how to move forward on these history issues? And candidate Yoon is a former prosecutor general, so I'm very interested to hear whether you have specifically a vision of how a President Yoon would handle the courts in foreign policy. And the rulings from the Supreme Court in 2018 sort of led to a downward spiral in diplomacy between Japan and Korea that we're still in the vortex of. And so I'm interested to hear, are there lessons from the Park Geun-hye administration or the Moon Jae-in administration that President Yoon would draw on in terms of how to best manage these types of historical lawsuits that are still percolating through the courts in order to steer a predictable or a consistent foreign policy with regard to Japan? And then finally, in terms of North Korea human rights, you mentioned that under a Yoon administration, sanctions should not be lifted without denuclearization steps from North Korea. During a Yoon administration, we would see the 10th anniversary of the UN Commission of Inquiry on North Korea Human Rights, which was a landmark process to expose human rights violations in North Korea. Under the previous conservative administration, you also had South Korea enacting a North Korea Human Rights Act under Park Geun-hye. So unfortunately, from my perspective, the momentum on North Korea human rights stalled under the Trump administration in the US and the Moon Jae-in administration in Korea. What new initiatives would a President Yoon pursue with regard to North Korea human rights? What avenues do you think are most promising in terms of making progress for improving the human rights of North Korean citizens? And also, how would a Yoon administration interact with NGOs in Korea who are trying to raise awareness about North Korea human rights? One of the complaints under the current Moon Jae-in administration from these NGOs has been that they have felt embattled and sidelined and defunded and under attack, even they say, from a Moon Jae-in administration. So how would a Yoon administration engage with the civil society actors in South Korea who are trying to raise awareness about North Korea human rights? And then with this North Korea human rights focus, I'm also curious what role you see the US-ROK relationship playing in terms of raising awareness and trying to address North Korea's human rights violations. And I'll stop there and turn it over to Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Celeste. Before we move to Mark's comments, Beomchul, did you want to respond to Celeste's questions now, or respond to both Celeste and Mark's comments after this?
I believe now is better because Dr. Arrington raised too many issues. If I listen to Dr. Tokola's question, I probably would not answer all. So please let me give 5 to 6 minutes to answer Dr. Arrington's question. First question is with regard to missile defense. First issue was THAAD. At the time in 2016, that was July, if my memory is correct. At the time, I was working at the Director General for Policy Planning at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now, all diplomatic efforts to China was stopped at the time. South Korea suffered economic and diplomatic pressure from China. However, at the time, the many Korean thought that the Park Geun-hye administration's position, which agreed to redeploy deploying the THAAD system at the time, was too early or too premature. That's the general public opinion at the time. However, as time goes by, after North Korea's nuclear test and after North Korea announced that their nuclear capability was finished, South Korea's public opinion has a little bit changed. So now I think that if South Korea would strengthen the missile defense, including THAAD system, the strength of the people's protest was not as strong as before, I believe. So I think that throughout the domestic persuasion process, throughout the politics or throughout the government effort to public relations, I think we can manage those protests. With regard to your comment on the Chinese economic retaliation, I think because at the time among Chinese many economic retaliation, most hurt one was I think that they are stopping sending tourists to South Korea. It hurted many tourism company and small shops who invited the Chinese tourists. So it hurted South Korea's economy. However, because of the COVID-19 at this moment, there is no Chinese tourist. So even if South Korea strengthens the amnesty system or that, Chinese economic measure to punish South Korea is not that strong as before. So I think that if South Korea decided based upon its own national interest, Chinese economic pressure, the importance of Chinese economic pressure are decreased because of the changes economic cooperation after the third retaliation. Your second point is Korea-Japan relation. I think that most different dramatic changes probably if Yoon administration start in May 10 next year, then it knows the importance of Korea-Japan relations. There is no political use of Korea-Japan relation, I think. The problem of Moon Jae-in administration is they utilized the ROK-Japan relation to boost domestic popularity. This is my personal view, not any view of President candidate Yoon Seok-youl, but I think that's the one source of weakening the Korea-Japan relations. However, I believe that Japan side also has to blame because of the revisionist view of a history issue. Actually, it hurt the South Korean people's respect of Korea-Japan relations. We have to get over this kind of a problem. But it's not easy because there is a new generation here in Korea and there in Japan. Here in Korea, because those young generation, they born after the South Korea's personal GDP is more than $30,000 US per year. So they have a self-oriented thinking of the different mindset before. On the other hand, in Japan, those young generation, they probably do not believe that they were responsible for their grandfather's mistake. So the people's public opinion is changing. So how to bring the kind of a consensus among those different people is the biggest challenge, I think. So it will be very hard to restore Korea-Japan relation, just like 1998's Kim Dae-jung Obuchi announcement. However, the important thing is, if Yoon Seok-youl administration start next year, they will not use the Korea-Japan relation to boost the domestic popularity. It tried to heal and renew and make a better relation with Japan. With regard to the president handle of court, no, it's impossible because of South Korea is a democratic country. We are divided. So I think it's impossible. However, we try to figure out the solution. I think that is important. You know that during Moon administration, former chair of our Congress, Moon Hee-sang, although he was the chairman of ruling party, he suggested Moon Hee-sang proposal to solve this kind of deadlock. However, it was refused by Moon administration. I think that's not the proper approach. We have to hammer out new idea. We have to persuade Japan to take more proper action with regard to Korea-Japan relations. So that can be, we can find a solution with regard to Korea-Japan relation. last point was human rights issue of North Korea. I think if Kim Jong-un administration would not change, it is almost impossible to improve human rights situation with a short time period. We have to know the reality. However, anyway, the candidate Yoon emphasized improving human rights situation of North Korea. So the candidate Yoon distinguished ordinary economic cooperation with humanitarian aid. With regard to the ordinary economic cooperation, we have to abide by international sanction on North Korea. So with the improvement of denuclearization of North Korea, there should be a lift of sanction, and then normalization of South Korea, North Korean economic cooperation is possible. On the other hand, even if the sanction exists without the lift of the sanction, we can start humanitarian aid to North Korea. But Moon administration would focus on more big event like a summit or end of war declaration. I think that's not the proper approach. To improve life condition of North Korean people, I think we would better focus on humanitarian aid to North Korea. So I think we have to figure out how to persuade North Korea to accept the humanitarian aid. So we have to work together with the international community, not only United States, but also the international organization, but also I think that with China. Last one is you raised the question with regard to NGOs. We know the problem that on the Moon administration, funding to NGOs who work on North Korean human rights was decreased. I think that's not the proper direction of our North Korean policy. So I hope there will be a redress of the policy and situation would be getting better. This is my answer to Professor Arrington. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comprehensive reply to Celeste's questions and comments. Mark, sorry for a change of plan. It's your turn now.
It's okay. Thank you. I know the role of a discussant is supposed to be to make some observations rather than to serve as an interrogator. But like Celeste, I've got a long list of questions because the relationship is so rich. There are a lot of topics we could discuss. So I don't expect Dr. Shin to reply to all of these points or questions. Let me just raise them as a way of making a list of issues we might want to talk about as the relationship moves forward for later conversation. So I'll put them in 5 groups, and I'll try to get out of the way quickly because there's some terrific questions from the audience I'd like to see raised. So first, the Moon-Biden joint statement from May 21st. I think many observers saw that as being remarkably detailed and comprehensive and future-oriented. Some people have referred to it as a blueprint for future work, but it's not a contract, it's just a plan. So would the next Korean administration see things to add to or subtract from the joint statement as the plan moving forward? Second, on North Korea, we're on this 2-track approach and both tracks are stuck. We've got the US-North Korea talks and we've got the inter-Korean talks, neither going anywhere right now. I think we both hope they will resume. But if they do, maybe we need to plan for success. What happens if talks resume? So what should be on the agenda for talks with North Korea, apart from denuclearization and sanctions relief? Should we talk to North Korea about cyber tax, conventional weapons limitations, economic reform? And is it too late to start talking about unification at some point with North Korea? Is that ship sailed? Second, apart from the 2 tracks, what happens after that? Do we need to have 3-party talks or 4-party talks or more countries involved? And how do you fold in interests of other countries that have a stake in the eventual peace settlement? What countries need to be spoken with? Third issue is third country relations. The Biden administration has placed heavy emphasis on regional and multilateral arrangements, not necessarily new treaties, but new flexible dealings of countries to deal with specific issues, both economic and security. So apart from the United States and China, and I guess I'll say Japan too, what other countries or groupings does South Korea need to prioritize its relations with? India, ASEAN, CP, TPP, the EU, the Quad. Are we going to see a return to more of Lee Myung-bak's global Korea, where you're actually dealing with a lot of areas and countries? Fourth, overlapping of economics and security. The US is used to dealing with security issues and economic issues as if they were different things. But now with the new issues emerging in supply chains, resiliency, protection digital networks, we're seeing a merging of national and economic security issues. The lines getting blurred between the two. So we're looking at a new relationship here between US government and US companies to talk about how they deal with these national security / economic issues. So does the South Korean government have a dialogue going on with the Chaebol, the South Korean corporations, about how South Korea will deal with those economic security issues? And are we going to end up with four-party talks between the US and South Korean governments and US corporations and the Korean corporations about how to advance those issues? I'm not sure the US government and companies necessarily agree at this point. And finally, on more detail on climate change, you raised that as a key issue, and it certainly is, but I'd like to bear down a bit on what South Korea can actually do and plans to do. I know South Korea, along with Japan and Saudi Arabia, are making a bet on hydrogen as being an energy source to mitigate climate change problems. But might South Korea also return to civilian nuclear energy as a way to deal with global warming? So that's Alexis, please don't go through all those in detail, but I'd like to just get them on the table.
Yes, Beomchul, you can be picky.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Tokola. So I will try to do my best. The first one is you mentioned about the May 21st as a joint statement. I think whether that is the plan or contract, I believe that that is the right direction for the Korea-US cooperation. So during my presentation, I emphasized not a word, but action is important. I think it is the right time. The next administration try to respect the joint statement and must act based upon that principle. That is my personal view, and I think that President candidate Yoon Seok-youl may have the same idea, understanding. Second question is North Korea's other issues like cyber and the conventional threat, and then the economic reformation. Yes, we have to handle all those issues, but frankly speaking, there is priorities. Still, the priority focuses on the nuclear issue, because the nuclear issue is not only the one single issue important, but also the basic position of North Korea. If North Korea shows its change, its sincerity, then it must act on the denuclearization steps. Without the denuclearization behavior, other action on the economic transformation or cyber issues, other issues, the sincerity, I don't see any sincerity on that issue. So still, we have, I understand there are many issues to deal with the North Korean issue, but I believe that nuclear issue shows the basic guideline on North Korea's policy direction. Third one is a regional issue. Yes, South Korea, you know, we are the 10th biggest economy in the world, so we have to deal with many other regions and countries. So I think that we have to multi-layer regional cooperation. We have to do that. Unfortunately, President candidate Yoon Seok-youl's election promises there is no area of regional cooperation. Maybe it will be prepared and announced soon. But I think that because of South Korea's engagement with other many countries, I think that we have to enhance our cooperation with the region. Among them, I think the ROK, US, and plus other countries, a small group of regional cooperation will be very necessary. Because, for example, with regard to development of the Southeast Asian country, maybe ROK, US, Vietnam cooperation plays a more important role. Maybe ROK, US, Indonesian cooperation maybe boost our cooperation in the region. With that kind of a small size, a small group of cooperation, I think it's more useful, because a big organization like APEC or other big cooperation, the cooperation between United States and South Korea, the impact is not that strong. So I think making many small size of group cooperation is more useful, I believe. But this is purely my personal view, and we have to organize presidential election promises. First is a supply chain. Yes, I agree with you. It's the most important one. So I think that we have to enhance our supply chain cooperation with the United States. The South Korea should emphasize, should strengthen the three-way of economic security issue. One is supply chain, in particularly the high-techs, as we noticed that May 21 joint statement as semiconductors, high capability batteries, and rare minerals, and medical issues. I think we have to strengthen the ROK-US cooperation with that kind of supply chain, but we have to expand the area of cooperation more among the other high-tech issues. That is supply chain security, economic security. Another one is, I think we have to think about the trade issues. United States is try to reassure, emphasize the reassure. I support the US policy. However, South Korea also think about the reassure in South Korea with regard to strategic industries. So I think we have to develop on that. Last one is data, because South Korea is a leading country of using internet rate or the other IT issues. So we have a lot of data inside of South Korea. However, certain countries try to hacking those kind of data. So I think we have to protect our own data. Maybe we have to expand our cooperation with the United States to protect, how to protect those kind of important data. So I think with this kind of economic security issue, we have to cooperate supply chain and trade and data security. Your last question is climate change. It's a very difficult one because Moon administration promises a very progressive way in the global fora. I would not say that we have to break that promise. We have to keep that promise, but it's not easy. So we have to transform our industries more climate friendly. But anyway, by doing that, we probably candidate Yoon re-emphasized the nuclear energy, because he criticized premature approach of Moon Jae-in administrations of try to shut down the nuclear energy. He criticized that. So I think that we try to reboost our use of nuclear energy. So these are the questions raised by you. I hope you would be satisfied with my answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Beomchul. I hope we will have a Q&A session for at least about 10 minutes. It's already 9:55, and if you will be generous enough with us, that means you will have to stay with us 5 minutes past midnight. Will that be okay, Beomchul?
Of course.
Thank you.
I'm
We have
generous guy. Thank you.
Thank you. We have great questions already in the Q&A box, and but let me focus on the questions related to foreign policy. A lot of domestic issues, the questions related to domestic issues. But let me pick up the questions about the foreign policies. So the first question is from Joon Hyung Park. What actions could candidate Yoon take if China places aggressive sanctions against ROK?
You know, the aggressive sanction to South Korea, I believe that at this moment, because South Korea's position to China is friendly, any kind of aggressive sanction broke the spirit of international relations. So I think South Korea must cope with China's, I don't say it's illegal, but improper sanction on South Korea. So we have to cope with that. We need international support from United States and other countries who support liberal democracy and human rights. So I think we have to cope with if the sanction is improper.
Thank you. Next question is from Adam Bubanich from GW East Asia National Resource Center. So with the continued spread of COVID-19, could there be any room for vaccine diplomacy between the two Koreas?
Yeah, I think that the COVID-19 here in Korea is re-spreading. There's another concern here in Korea. With regard to North Korea, they still shut down its border. International cooperation to provide the vaccine to North Korea. The progress is very slow because North Korea not only need a vaccine, also it need facilities. The facility itself needed to lift off sanction. So it's a very complicated issue. But anyway, South Korea has an intention to provide vaccine to North Korea. But most important point is Kim Jong-un's position, whether he accept a vaccine from South Korea or international community. He need his own decision. And then the progress will be easy after Kim Jong-un's decision to accept the vaccine from international community.
Thank you. Next question is from Eugene Chang. So would you elaborate on how quote unquote mutual respect had been broken during the THAAD cooperation with China in 2016?
Yes. No, South Korea consider the deployment of THAAD, I think at least more than 1 year. It was first discussed, as far as my memory is correct, starting 2014. But our THAAD deployment was, decision was made July 4 or 6 in 2016. So more than 1 year, more than 1 and 6 months like that. During that process, South Korea, the reason why South Korea delayed the decision of deploy THAAD system is considered of Chinese position, Chinese concern. However, the South Korea's decision of deployment of THAAD was established of North Korea's nuclear test in 2016. At the time, the size of nuclear test was huge. So we realized that North Korea has nuclear capability in 2016 to cope with that kind of threat. To maintain our own deterrence, South Korea at the time made a delayed decision to deploy THAAD. This is a reasonable security concern based upon, but China just levied a sanction on South Korea without the decision of discussion on the economic sanction. So I think that's a unilateral sanction, which was unreasonable. So I think that mutual respect, China has its own security concern, but South Korea also have its own security concern. That South Korea must respect South Korea's position and has to discuss the matter. Unilateral sanction was, I think, improper at the time. That's what I said, mutual respect is necessary.
Thank you. Next question is from Elliot Cha. You mentioned that Yoon's administration are eager to restore the relationship between South Korea and China, and South Korea, Japan. What are the current methods that Yoon's administration pursue to restore with neighboring countries? I think you already touched upon these issues, but if there are anything you want to add, please do so.
I believe, this is my personal view, that I believe that based upon my experience, there is a new magic, there is no new magical diplomacy. Diplomacy reveals the reality of international relations. So at this moment, because of the China's rise and China's somewhat aggressive diplomacy, it raises concern on South Korea and Japan. However, South Korea and Japan also knows the importance of improving its own relation with China. I think so there is a room for cooperation, although there are many turbulences in the relation among three, but I think that step by step improvement of the relation is the right direction. Although it's going to take a long time, but direction itself is improved relation, not conflict.
Thank you. Next question, Jungmin Lee. Considering the recent bilateral talk between China and Russia to enhance their cooperation on Korean Peninsula, what are the measures candidate Yoon have in consideration to counter the potential economic cooperation by Russia and China to pressure South Korea?
There is no position of President Yoon because he did not mention on those kind of issue. So I cannot but to say that my own understanding on China-Russia relations, I think the China-Russia relation is indeed strategic cooperation because their rival is the United States, but they know that they cannot compete with the United States alone. So they do some cooperation. In the European areas, China respects Russia's position, so China supports Russia's position. In the Indo-Pacific area, Russia respects Chinese position, so Russia supports Chinese policy. In Korean Peninsula, Russia-China cooperation, I think it's more leaning toward North Korea these days. These raise a concern on the security expert here in Korea. So I think the we have to watch closely on their cooperation, but still we have a countermeasures because Russia needs to boost its Far Eastern areas economy. South Korea can be the option. So I think that if South Korea enlarge its economic cooperation with Russia, Russia's relative role will be decreased. This kind of a step-by-step approach, I think that's the best way to deal with Russia-China cooperation, I think.
Thank you. It's already 10:05, so thank you for your generosity and joining us and stay up late at night punctual. I'd like to thank all the distinguished speakers for joining us today. And I'd like to also thank our GWIKS team, Sean and Kim, for putting this together. And of course, thank you all for joining us. With that, let me conclude today's webinar. Stay safe and healthy. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.